Your testimony has been extremely helpful. You've raised a lot of very important issues, some of which I hadn't thought about. So really appreciate your testimony. Attorney Toma.
Thank you.
Chairman Quirk,
Yes,
I'm
go right
sorry,
ahead.
I apologize. If you could indulge me just one question.
Certainly.
Thank you so much. Just specific to the two people who just spoke. I just want to make sure I heard something clearly. I may have misunderstood. Ms. Riggets, you mentioned missing video, and it sounded like you suggested that if there were behavior called into question where the video was missing, that would essentially dismiss the case. Did I hear that correctly?
I don't think that the case should be dismissed simply because the video is missing, but there should be some sort of jury instruction available, a presumption that this may reflect on the credibility of the officer. If his camera was supposed to be on, it was turned off shortly before, or if there, I mean, I suppose that you have to be a little careful about how you word this, but if there are problems with certain departments, for example, earlier this morning, somebody referenced a program that put dash cams in 300 police vehicles in South LA. Well, there was a scandal where 72 of them had been tampered with by the officers, and their supervisors did not bring it to the attention of the police commission. So, if there's a problem with the police department, that's certainly something, even if it appears to be a glitch or a broken equipment, that should be on the department to make sure that those things don't happen. And so there should be a presumption available to anyone where they were arrested and their arrest should have been videotaped, but it wasn't for whatever reason. The presumption should be that that affects the credibility of the police department or the police officer.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Mastagni, I think it seems that you are in agreement that the videos can and should be viewed in certain circumstances, but not all. I wrote down as you were speaking, but that you want some specific guidelines put in place for who gets to view it and when and where with respect to police officers. Is that correct?
What I think is we need some kind of law giving people standing to say, hey, when this video was taken, I was a sexual assault victim or a rape victim or something like that, and I really, for my own privacy, would hope that this doesn't get put on television because of who I am or who the perpetrator was. But on the question of the missing videos, there's missing evidence. I've practiced law for 42 years, trial law. There's missing evidence in lots of cases. And what I do and what other lawyers do is you bring up the pattern, you show the pattern, and you argue to the jury or the finder of fact that there's a credibility issue. To carte blanche say there's a presumption of innocence or a presumption that the police officer is not telling the truth because the video is missing is a bridge too far. The defendant could break the video. And so we do need to protect the public when we do this. This is actually going to be a very effective law enforcement tool, but the interest of the citizens and the public, and I can tell you on my own experience, because we represent both managerial law enforcement and rank and file, no police officer or police manager is out to perpetrate a fraud on the public or to abuse anyone's rights. They go out working every day with the good-hearted intention of serving the public. And while this is something that is coming, it needs to be thought out in terms of law enforcement interest, all of the stakeholders, but most of all the public, the citizenry. Their rights need to be looked at.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And again, Attorney Ricketts and Mastagni, you have brought up some excellent points. I'm really glad that you've testified today. Attorney President Toma
Thank
of
you,
the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice, who do, in fact, defend the people who are accused of crime throughout the state.
Thank you. On behalf of CACJ and myself, I embrace this opportunity. I already was very impressed with the fact that you were going to look into this area of body cameras, but in this over an hour that I've been listening to this testimony, it is amazing how well balanced your issues of safety and privacy are being developed here. Our position probably is at this point that body cameras certainly are not a panacea for accountability, and a lot of these issues need to be addressed and ironed out before a full rollout of them, a very thorough review, as this body is already contemplating. It is an instance where we have an opportunity to do something truly landmark, which is foster an atmosphere of greater trust between the public and law enforcement in those cases involving criminal justice or civil rights. Just a couple of points, and I'm not going to address everything. I actually think quite a few of the areas I was going to discuss were handled admirably already by my civil counterparts. But I want to point out a couple of things. With regard to chain of custody, it probably should be taken into account like any other chain of custody, but certainly if editing is ever contemplated, then it should be reviewed by all parties if any editing of any of the materials that are done there. Also, the cautionary point that when individual officers are involved, they should not have a manual override, an ability to turn off the cameras. We found that in areas where we tried those in vehicles, that instance did not do what you are trying to do, which is foster an atmosphere of greater trust. Certainly there are areas or times when they are not in the best interest of the public. There can be a good and thorough discussion regarding a home search or a return on a search warrant. But with regard to manually being override, I think that's an issue that you really need to watch out for. With regard to access, there's the area that you've discussed with regard to investigation, but in criminal justice, basically when the case is being filed, at the outset you get a package of initial discovery. It should be with that, because really by having to wait for a specific request, it would take a great deal of time. Certainly all district attorney offices handle their arraignments in their own peculiar and specific ways, and it may not be at that exact moment when the defendant is being charged, but it should be as quickly thereafter as possible. With regard to general use of the body camera and Fourth Amendment, I personally don't see any problem with it, with the exception of the areas that I already discussed, because you're usually seeing the camera in the plain view of the officer wearing the camera. But there will be times and instances where that is an exception, house searches, search warrant returns, or the like. If you have any further questions in particular, I'd be more than happy to address them.
Thank you very much for your excellent testimony. We'll now hear from Deputy DA Paul Hora.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee for having us. I'm here on behalf of Alameda County District Attorney Nancy O'Malley, and I am Paul Hora, an Assistant DA with the Alameda County DA's office. I think, in short, I would say as a prosecutor, I love evidence, because evidence really, drives the bus for me. And so body cameras in that regard, of course, can provide valuable and excellent evidence in many cases. I've seen it with my own two eyes and heard it with my own 2 ears. It can be excellent. And the sooner I get it, the better. The sooner I get that evidence, the better, because it helps me make decisions about whether or not I'm going to file charges in a criminal case. It can help me decide what charges to file in a criminal case, whether it be felony or misdemeanor, or often I'll have lots of different options that I can pick from. It can also result in the swift resolution of a criminal case, which of course creates lots of efficiencies for the entire criminal justice system. And in the end, having strong evidence also increases the confidence that we have in the result that we get from any disposition of a criminal case. Now, having said that, video evidence is excellent evidence in many criminal cases, it also comes with lots of challenges. And personally, from what I've seen, the biggest challenge is getting it and knowing it exists. Those are the two biggest issues. The sooner I get the evidence, the better, because then I can review it and I can disclose it to the defense. And it's to our benefit for the defense to have that evidence quickly, because it often results in quicker resolutions of cases and more accurate and better, fairer resolutions of cases. A police report should always tell me whether or not there's a camera. I mean, always. I mean, because police reports are fast or easy to review. I can do that really quickly while I'm sitting at my desk. Videos can take hours, depending on what the video is. And so I need to know if that information exists. I have Brady obligations. I have statutory obligations under the penal code to disclose this information. And if I don't know it exists, not only is my my conviction, at risk, but it's not fair. And I may not be making a fair decision based on all the information, and nor may I be making a fair, or disposing of the case fairly in the interest of the defendant. So I need to know if that information exists, and I need to get it. The biggest problems I've seen is where you have these mass situations where there are many, many, many people and many, many, many officers. Let's say in a riot situation, lots and lots of officers come to an incident, they join and they leave the incident, and it can last for hours, and there can be multiple people involved in the incident. Figuring out who was there and what camera caught what can be almost impossible, as opposed to just saying, give me every officer's camera from the night of, January 1st. And that could result in thousands of hours of video. One thing, I don't know if it's available, I like the idea of having GPS on them. So I can say, hey, give me every officer's camera at 123 Main Street at 8 p.m. on this date and time, within a 100-foot radius. And then maybe I can see it that way. But of course, technology, which is what these cameras are, changes rapidly. And I think we're going to, naturally 5 years from now, the cameras aren't going to be the same as they are today. But managing that information, from what I can see, is the biggest challenge that we have as prosecutors, is getting a hold of it, making sure we have all of it, so we can appropriately and efficiently disclose it to the defense, so we can keep our cases moving in the right direction and making sure we resolve them fairly. So, in the interest of time, I'll leave it at that.
All right. Thank you, Assistant DA. If every DA handled camera information like that, I think we'd all be very happy.
Agreed.
Agreed. Your defense attorneys agree as well. All right. Does anyone know, does the TASER camera seems to be the one that's out there the most. Does anyone know if that includes GPS on that? Is there anyone in the audience perhaps who knows? Yes, come forward. You could perhaps speak up at that.
Yes, Tony Farrar from the Rialto Police Department. They're currently working on some new technology, and not to give away all their secrets that are out there, but it does have GPS and Bluetooth capabilities that are coming forward this year, so that'll be another bonus.
Excellent. Well, there's part of your answer. I'm very glad to hear that. Other Assembly Member Santiago or Assembly Member Alejo? I will say in all of this, the biggest question, well, again, I'll go back to the first panel. One of the questions is, when does it get turned on and when does it get turned off? And if things are turned off in the middle, it really defeats the whole purpose of having the camera. So that's something we're really going to have to take a look at. I think someone made the suggestion that in order to turn off a camera, you need to get permission and have that on camera, that you've gotten the permission. I think that's an excellent suggestion. Because we do want to turn them off at times, but only at certain prescribed times. Some of the other things I've heard here were about for civil cases and what should be released in civil cases. And I don't know, so that was not covered in most of the discussion we had in the first few panels. I think we're going to have to look very carefully at that, but it's hard for me to believe that there wouldn't be at least the ability for you to view the videos. One of the concerns I have is that if somebody has the ability to view it and then, for whatever reason, releases it publicly, we have to make sure that we define when someone can simply view it versus when someone can release it publicly. I think that's another issue that we'll have to address. Would the civil attorneys be interested in addressing that issue? All right, Ms. Ricketts.
In terms of whether somebody could release when.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I would hope that when we get through all of this, we'll say when there's civil litigation that you're able to view it. The question is, to what extent should that also be made public?
Well, before I even address that, I'd first point out, we had this incident on Sunday in LAPD, and that person who died, as I understand it, was homeless and mentally ill. So there's a whole class of people who are never going to be litigated because there's nobody that has standing to bring their cases. And should their videos be released to the public? And I would argue that, there needs to be some provision for that because there's no other way to notice a pattern.
Okay.
As far as should civil, video be released, I think that that would be up to the party, in my opinion. The victim of police misconduct or the alleged victim of police misconduct. But, I'll let my colleague comment on what he thinks.
Thank you. I can tell you positively that the issue is addressed over and over again on subject matters equally sensitive to body video cameras. And courts generally put in place a protective order with penalties, and 9 times out of 10 you can call the other attorney and say, hey, this is my reason I'm meeting and conferring with you over the handling of this piece of evidence post discovery. And so I don't really think that's a big issue other than to make the statement that a protective order is necessary.
That said, if it goes to trial and the video is used, then it becomes public.
Right.
So.
Okay. All right. If there are no other questions, then I really want to thank this panel for bringing forward a number of very important issues.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
So we've heard a lot about the camera information, and we are now going to hear from Stuart McKee, who is the National Technology Officer for Microsoft Corporation. He's going to discuss storage and retention considerations from a technical point of view. We'll give the sergeants a few minutes to clear the tables here. So we have Mr. McKee and...
My name is Richard Zach. I'm the Director of Justice and Public Safety Solutions for Microsoft.
Thank you. I'm glad to have you both here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Stuart McKee. I'm the National Technology Officer for Microsoft's public sector business. It's a position I've held for 10 years. I work with governments across the country and around the world on important topics like this related to technology. Really appreciate the committee taking the time to kind of address really what's an emerging issue. I've also had the opportunity to serve as a CIO for the state of Washington and work with a number of organizations across the country, including the FBI CJIS division, on topics specifically related to how we handle criminal justice information. As such, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and be qualified to talk before you. If it pleases the chairman, I'm going to be quite brief in my comments in respect of time. I've heard that as a common theme so far, so I'll try and do my best. I am a technologist, and I am quite excited about what I do and would love to talk to you all day long about the emerging technologies. The fact is, it's a fantastic time we live in. I heard the word tools a number of times today. The fact of the matter is technology is moving consistently and rapidly. It would be impossible for this committee to anticipate the changes in the emerging technologies that are coming. But one thing is for sure. We know that technology is going to continue to move, as it particularly relates to the business and public safety mission. As we move from teletypes to television and new technologies, we will have more emerging. One of the facts that is the reality of the digitization of technology is we're now dealing with terabytes of data. You've often heard the word, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I would argue to you that a video is worth tens of thousands of terabytes. The fact is, you heard it a number of times, there is a great challenge across the jurisdictions around the country just dealing with the volumes of information and data. So the one reality of that is, with these exciting advances, there will be a lot of new issues and scale required to deal with issues like camera to cloud and how we handle this data. But to simplify it for this committee, let me focus on a very specific principle, and that is based in trust, which I've heard a number of times here. We've heard a number of issues that video out in the public will be capturing all kinds of unintended information. I heard children brought up a number of times. I heard HIPAA brought up a number of times. There's a whole host of other issues. I would argue to the committee that all data should be protected. Citizens expect it. Second, there is a standard. We know how to do this. We don't have to invent something new. The FBI Criminal Justice Information Services Division has dealt with managing criminal justice information for a long time. It's good hygiene. The standard exists. Smart people created it, including a number of organizations like the California Department of Justice, who's a participatory member of the FBI Advisory Policy Board. And finally, and probably the most important, is you should expect the providers who engage in these new systems and things that are being deployed to be held to the same standards that the law enforcement individuals are held to as well. It's basic good hygiene. So in the real interest of brevity, I'll conclude my comments there. We've introduced Rick, who's also director in our Justice and Public Safety organization, works around. We'd be happy to answer questions, and we'll continue to work with staff and the committee as you move forward with this important topic.
All right. Well, I warn you, I am a technologist as well. So the first question I would like to ask, first of all, a lot of people have said up here that they're looking at cloud storage considerations so that you have protections necessary both of the camera itself, of the camera when it is brought in and then data is being transferred perhaps directly to the cloud or perhaps onto a server and then into the cloud. Perhaps you could talk, either one of you could talk a bit about how we protect against unlawful access to those to that information. Do you have solutions? Are there solutions out there?
Yeah, so let me try and answer that as crisply as possible. First, I want to say there's no magic bullet. As much as I'm a technologist, I would love to tell you and talk about encryption and virtualization, and I expect you and I could have quite an interesting dialogue. There's nothing that will replace people and good process and procedure. You alluded to the idea that these cameras are really sensors that allow you to capture, record, but we really didn't talk a lot about transmit and analyze. There's certainly a lot of exceptional things we'll be able to do with the data and information, but I did hear the word chain of custody earlier. Being able to maintain that data in a way that you can submit in a court of law, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm speaking a little out of school here, are very, very critical, important things. The standard by which data should be handled is known, and it should be the FBI CJIS policy specifically, which is quite prescriptive on many levels of detail about how you would manage data, what you would do with it. And frankly, we should expect providers and others to contractually commit to those requirements. We expect law enforcement to do it. We should expect the providers to do it as well.
Great. Again, people have talked about cloud solutions, by which they mean that the data is not necessarily being stored on site, but on servers that Microsoft or Amazon or Google are managing. Can you address those solutions and how you see that reacting to the various challenges that we have in storage of the data and retrieval?
Yeah, so the question is, I can certainly speak for us. I'll be quite careful that I don't speak for others, but it's safe to say that not all clouds are the same. And to demystify it a little bit, the word cloud is kind of a sensational, exciting word, as if something was invented overnight. But the reality is where we are today is a very, very predictable evolution of technology. Cloud technology is simply network-enabled computing. And in the business of law enforcement, the fact is teletypes were a cloud solution. They just happened to be point-to-point. You had a terminal connected over a wire to another terminal. The data information was primarily text data going one way. On the other end, somebody could rip off a piece of paper. As long as you locked the door where the teletype was and you made sure you knew who had the piece of paper, that's how you took care of it. Our infrastructure today, our teletypes are in our pockets. Are in our pockets.
Right.
They're in our cars. Our teletypes are connected everywhere. Data is flowing two ways, and it's all kinds of data. We're not just talking about text. We're talking about audio, video. I heard GIS brought up. There's a number of other things that can and will be captured. Cloud is not a decision per se. It's a natural fabric of how these technologies are put together. There's no avoiding it. There's no decision in or out. The fact is there's still going to be on-premise requirements that will have to be enabled with cloud infrastructure. The sheer volumes we're talking about will require it. Law enforcement agencies across the country and across the state of California will not be able to build the infrastructure to handle the volumes. The second thing is we want to do a lot of creative stuff, and this is getting specifically maybe to what we do, and I don't want this to be a commercial, but all kinds of technology companies are doing really creative things. We have a thing called Project Anaheim where we're implementing machine learning technologies to take video and audio storage. In fact, my own experience as a CIO for the state of Washington with public records had to do with legislative hearings. And it's the idea that taking video such as this hearing and being able to index it and archive it in a way that makes it searchable and accessible over a period of time. It's safe for me to say there will be an incredible amount of innovations that will be continuing to come to market, and it'll be challenging for us to not be enamored by the shiny object of it and yet still understand the public safety mission requires a fiduciary responsibility for us to address key requirements that already exist, regardless of the marketing terms we put on it, whether it's cloud or we used to call it the web, we used to call it client server. I'm not sure what we'll call it tomorrow, but it'll be something new.
All right. And then one more question. Our professor from Stanford talked about the many, many hours that have to be reviewed and essentially was asking for an intelligent search of video. How is that technology proceeding?
Great question. It's proceeding rapidly and very well, but I will set expectations. We're not at a CSI Hollywood perception. The capability to facial recognition technologies, redaction, things like that are advancing quite rapidly. And to answer your other question as well, those capabilities have been made available by cloud technologies, which is the idea that we can create massive infrastructure and apply massive compute cycles to some of these problems. So they're advancing rapidly. I can tell you we as a company are committed very much to this particular industry and government in general, and we'll continue to bring great products to market that I think will be very powerful tools for the mission of public safety.
Great. Questions from other committee members? Well, this has been very illuminating. I really want to thank you for being here. I'm pleased that we do have this technology available because there are going to be tremendous issues of, as you say, indexing the data, searching the data. Our Stanford professor for trying to figure out what's going on has talked about how do we find the critical incidents. This is definitely going to be a great tool in the future, and I am glad that you and others are working on this technology. So thank you very much. I really do appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman?
Do we have any closing statements from other committee members? All right, so I do have a closing statement, which I think some of the things that we've discussed today cameras being turned on and when they're turned off. I think we'll be able to get to a good consensus on that. And the types of incidents. But I think the difficulty is going to be here, is going to be primarily on who has access to the video, when they have access to it, the extent to which things should be available publicly, et cetera. And I think this is probably took up the majority of our testimony today, and I think that was very appropriate. So I'm hoping that I and my colleagues can come up with legislation that addresses this. We heard from the Oakland DA that his city attorney said that basically that unless it's being used for evidence, it ought to be open public record. We heard the opposite from LA. I think it is up to us as legislators to come up with guidelines, and I hope that we'll be doing that. It might take us more than this 1 year to do it. It might be something that we negotiate over a period of the full term of 2 years, or it could be something we'll do now. But I think that's probably one of the most important issues that we will be addressing, and I will make a personal commitment that we will have, by the end of this session, that we will have guidelines. All right, the next stage is public comment. Who would be coming up to make public comment? In the last hearing I had, we had over an hour of public comment. No? No one for public comment? Oh, we do we have public? Yeah, come on down, have a seat. Please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Aaron McGuire on behalf of the California State Sheriff's Association. If you hadn't received it yet, we did distribute a 2-page letter. I'd be happy to share a copy with you. And a lot of the points have been already covered by a lot of the other testimony, but I just wanted to give you the perspective from the sheriffs in terms of what we're looking at. Several bills have obviously been introduced already dealing with body cameras, and we started outlining what our positions are going to be on the subject matter. First and foremost, we're obviously very concerned about the privacy issues, both from an officer perspective and for victims of crime. And certainly when we're talking about when the privacy of the citizenry, as was brought up by another member who testified, we're concerned about crossing the threshold, what's happening inside someone's home, and certainly if we were dealing with victims of crime and if those victims are also children as well. For those reasons, with those kind of encounters, we're also taking the tact on the disclosure side that we would argue that there should just be a broad exemption from the Public Records Act for this type of video footage. We think the litigation that's going to ensue in terms of trying to draw where these lines are between, is it an investigation, is someone's right to privacy at stake here? We think most of the time, the vast majority of the time, it will tilt towards the privacy of the victim, should be protected, and for that, we think it would just be easier to have a broad exemption to the Public Records Act request for Public Records Acts when we're dealing with body-worn camera footage. Likewise, we don't want to see, when we're dealing with some of the labor management issues, we think that needs to be dealt with as much flexibility as possible. We don't think the state is ready to impose strict guidelines on how that should work out. We think that needs to be done in some ways at the local level. We think there is little to no value to mandate that an officer should be allowed to view the video footage ahead of time or should not be allowed to view the video footage ahead of time. We think there are circumstances in which both those circumstances could be allowed. And then again, on the issue of retention and storage, we think that needs to be worked out at the local level as well. There'll be some times where you want to keep that video footage indefinitely. We think in some instances it should be destroyed as soon as possible. So with that, Mr. Chair, we look forward to working on these issues. And again, if you need a copy of the letter, I'd be happy to leave that behind.
Yes, I do have the letter here.
Okay.
I very much appreciate your testimony. Thank you very much. Any other public comment? Well, again, I want to thank committee staff very much for putting together a great list of witnesses. I learned a lot today. I want to thank all the panel members for the great work they did, and our committee members for attending. So thank you all very much.